The moment I discovered my fiancée had eloped with my younger brother, I knew my life would never be the same, but neither would theirs. So I canceled our joint accounts, sold the engagement ring, and cut all contact with my backstabbing family. As they drove off into their fairy tale sunset, Stella smugly texted me, "Felix, I always said family comes first. Well, now Cyrus and I are family. Don't bother trying to win me back." What they didn't know was that our grandfather's will contained a very specific clause about family loyalty and marriage. 3 months later, when the inheritance lawyers called an emergency family meeting, I walked into that conference room with my new fiancé on my arm and watched their faces turn white as they realized their betrayal had just cost them everything. That night, Stella showed up at my penthouse, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Felix. There has to be a way to fix this. I'll leave him. I'll do anything." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I should have known something was wrong when Stella started working late every Tuesday and Thursday. She claimed her interior design firm had landed a major client in downtown Portland, some tech billionaire who wanted his penthouse completely redesigned. But Stella had always been terrible at lying. Her voice got this slightly higher pitch. Whenever she wasn't telling the truth, the first red flag should have been when she suddenly became interested in my brother Cyrus's photography business. For 3 years, she'd barely acknowledged his existence beyond polite hellos at family dinners. Cyrus was the artistic one, the dreamer, the brother who'd dropped out of business school to chase his passion for landscape photography. While I'd been building my real estate empire from the ground up, Cyrus had been traveling the Pacific Northwest with his camera, barely making enough money to cover his rent. But suddenly, Stella was asking about his work, suggesting we invite him to dinner more often, even recommending him to her wealthy clients for their home photo shoots. I thought she was finally making an effort to connect with my family. What an idiot I was. The truth came crashing down on a rainy Thursday evening in October. I'd planned to surprise Stella at her office with dinner from her favorite Thai restaurant, the one in the Hawthorne district, where we'd had our first date 3 years ago. But when I arrived at Morrison Design Group's sleek glass building, the security guard informed me that Stella had left hours ago. She rushed out around 2 o'clock with some tall guy with a camera bag, he said, checking his logbook. Seemed pretty excited about something. My stomach dropped, but I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe she was scouting locations with a photographer for a client project. Maybe it was completely innocent. I drove to her apartment in the Pearl District, using the key she'd given me 6 months ago when we'd started talking about moving in together after the wedding. The place was dark, but I could see mail piling up by the door, several days' worth. Her car wasn't in the parking garage either. That's when I decided to check our shared location app. We'd started using it a year ago for practical reasons, coordinating dinner plans, making sure the other got home safely after late nights out. The little blue dot that represented Stella's phone was 200 miles south, in a small town called Ashford. Near Mount Rainier? What the hell was she doing in Ashford? I called her phone 3 times, straight to voicemail each time. Then I called Cyrus, also voicemail. The coincidence was too strange to ignore. Instead of driving home to our shared loft in the industrial district, I found myself heading south. On I-5, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. The October rain hammered against my windshield as I drove through the night. Following that blue dot on my phone screen, I reached Ashford around midnight. It was one of those tiny mountain towns that existed primarily to serve tourists heading to Mount Rainier National Park, a handful of lodges, a few restaurants, some gift shops. The kind of place couples went for romantic weekend getaways. The location app led me to the paradise in a rustic lodge that looked like something out of a postcard. I parked across the street and sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to convince myself this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe Stella was here on business. Maybe Cyrus was just a coincidence. But when I walked into the lodge's cozy lobby, I could hear her laugh coming from the restaurant, that distinctive musical laugh that had made me fall in love with her at a gallery opening 3 years ago. I followed the sound around a corner, and there they were. Stella and Cyrus sat at a corner table by the fireplace, her hand covering his as they leaned in close, talking in hushed, intimate tones. She was wearing the emerald dress I'd bought her in Paris last spring, the one she said made her feel beautiful. Her engagement ring, my grandmother's ring, caught the firelight as she reached up to touch his face. They looked at each other. The way she used to look at me in the early days of our relationship, the way I thought she still looked at me. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, watching the woman I'd planned to marry in 6 weeks, gazed lovingly at my younger brother. Watching Cyrus, who'd been best man in my previous relationships, would help me pick out Stella's engagement ring stroke, her hair like she belonged to him. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice me until I was standing right next to their table. "This is cozy," I said. Stella jerked her hand away from Cyrus like she'd been burned, her face cycling through shock, guilt, and then something that looked almost like relief. Cyrus had the decency to look ashamed, his face flushing red as he stumbled to his feet. "Felix, I can explain," Stella started. "Can you?" I pulled out my phone and took a photo of them sitting there, her lipstick slightly smudged, his shirt wrinkled, the intimate table setting between them. From where I'm standing, it looks pretty self-explanatory. Other diners were starting to stare. The elderly couple at the next table over had stopped eating their dessert to gawk at our drama. A family with teenagers near the window is not so subtly recording with their phones. "Brother, please," Cyrus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let us explain what happened." "What happened?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Happened as my fiancée and my brother decided to have a romantic getaway 6 weeks before our wedding. What happened is I've been planning our honeymoon to Greece while you two have been planning whatever this is." Stella finally found her voice, and when she spoke, there was a defiance in her tone that I'd never heard before. "You want to know? What happened, Felix? What happened is I fell in love with someone who actually sees me as a person, not a trophy to show off to your business partners." The words hit me like a physical blow. A trophy. When was the last time you asked me about my work, my dreams, my feelings about anything that wasn't related to our wedding or your next real estate deal? Her voice was getting louder, drawing more attention from the other diners. "Cyrus listens to me. He cares about my thoughts, my art, my opinions. Doesn't just want me to look pretty on his arm at charity galas." I stared at her, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in months. She was right about some things. I had been consumed with work lately. The wedding planning, with maintaining the image of the successful young entrepreneur. But that didn't justify this. "So instead of talking to me about it, you decided to sneak around with my brother?" "We didn't plan this," Cyrus interjected. "It just ... happened. We were working together on a project and we connected. And you decided to betray the person who's supported both of you for years." I looked around the restaurant, at all the faces staring at us, and suddenly felt exhausted. "You know what? I don't want to hear the details. I don't want your explanations or your excuses." I pulled off my watch, a Rolex that had been my grandfather's, and set it on the table. "Consider this your wedding gift to each other, because clearly you've already made your choice." As I turned to leave, Stella called after me. "Felix, wait." I stopped but didn't turn around. "We can work this out. We can all be adults about this, Cyrus and I. We want to be together, but that doesn't mean we can't all still be family." That's when I finally turned back to look at her. This woman I'd loved, who I'd planned to spend my life with, who I'd trusted with everything I had. "Family?" I said, quietly. "Stella, you haven't been family to me for a long time. You've just been an expensive habit I couldn't break." I walked out of that lodge and drove straight back to Portland, my phone buzzing constantly with calls and texts that I ignored. By the time I reached the city limits, I'd made my decision. If they wanted to be together so badly, they could have. Each other. But they were going to learn that actions have consequences, and some consequences last a lifetime. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my home office overlooking the Willamette River, making a list of everything I needed to do by sunrise. I was already on the phone with my lawyer, my accountant, and my bank. The first call was to cancel our joint credit cards. Stella had always been a spender, designer clothes, expensive art pieces for her apartment, weekly spa treatments, dinners at Portland's most exclusive restaurants, all charged to cards that I paid off every month without complaint. Within an hour, every single card was canceled. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Next, I called our wedding planner. Christine Liu had been coordinating our June wedding at the McMenamins Kennedy School for 8 months. The deposit alone had been $15,000, but I didn't care about the money anymore. "Mr. Young, I'm so sorry to hear about this," Christine said, after I explained the situation. "Are you sure there's no chance of reconciliation? Could postpone rather than cancel completely." "Christine, trust me. This wedding is never happening. Cancel everything. The venue, the flowers, the band, the photographer, all of it. What about the dress? Stella has a final fitting scheduled. For next week, she can keep the dress," I said. "Maybe she can wear it to her next wedding." By noon, I'd also canceled the honeymoon reservations in Santorini, sold Stella's engagement ring back to the jeweler at a significant loss. But again, I didn't care and transferred the money from our joint savings account money. I'd contributed 90% of VIN to my personal account. Then came the harder call. I dialed my father's number, knowing this conversation would change our family dynamics forever. "Felix, how's the wedding? Planning going?" "Your mother's been worried about seating arrangements, Dad. There's not going to be a wedding." Silence on the other end of the line. "What do you mean, son?" I told him everything about finding Stella and Cyrus together, about their apparent affair, about their decision to be together. My father listened in stunned silence, occasionally making small sounds of disbelief. "Jesus, Felix. I'm so sorry. When did this start? How long has this been going on?" "I don't know, and honestly, I don't want to know. But Dad, I need you to understand something. I'm cutting contact with Cyrus completely. I don't want him at family dinners, holiday gatherings, nothing. If you and Mom want to maintain a relationship with him, that's your choice, but I won't be part of it." "Felix, he's your brother?" "No, Dad. A brother doesn't do what he did. A brother doesn't steal his brother's fiancée 6 weeks before the wedding. A brother doesn't sneak around for God knows how long, lying to everyone." My father sighed heavily. "What do you want me to tell your mother? Tell her the truth. Tell her that her younger son decided his happiness was more important than basic human decency." After I hung up, I drove to Cyrus's apartment in the Alberta Arts District. His photography studio was on the ground floor, his living space above it. I had a key. He'd given it to me years ago for emergencies. Back when we were actually brothers, the space was exactly what you'd expect from a struggling artist. Exposed brick walls covered with his landscape photographs, vintage furniture. From thrift stores, more camera equipment than actual furniture. I walked through the rooms methodically, looking for any evidence of how long this betrayal had been going on. In his bedroom, found a silk scarf I'd bought Stella for her birthday last year. On his kitchen counter, a coffee mug from her favorite cafe. In his camera bag, memory cards labeled with dates going back 3 months. 3 months. They'd been lying to me for 3 months. I was examining a memory card when I heard voices outside. Through the window, I could see Cyrus's beat-up Honda Civic pulling into the alley behind the building. He and Stella got out, both looking tired and stressed. They were holding hands. I met them at the door to the studio. "Felix," Cyrus said, his face pale. "What are you doing here?" "Returning your key," I said, tossing it at his feet, "and collecting some answers." Stella pushed past both of us into the studio, her designer heels clicking on the concrete floor. She'd changed out of the emerald dress into jeans and one of Cyrus's flannel shirts, playing the part of the bohemian artist's girlfriend already. "You canceled our credit cards," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I tried to buy gas this morning, and the card was declined. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" Stared at her. After everything that had happened, she was worried about embarrassment at a gas station? Worried about embarrassment? "Stella, you cheated on me with my brother? You've been lying to me for months? You destroyed our relationship, our engagement, our families, and you're concerned about being embarrassed at a Shell station?" "I never meant for it to happen this way," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Cyrus and I, We tried to fight it, but sometimes you can't help who you fall in love with. Fall in love with? I looked back and forth between them. Is that what we're calling it? Cyrus stepped forward, trying to play peacemaker. Brother, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but Stella and I, what we have is real. It's not some fling or midlife crisis. We want to be together. Then be together, I said simply. But don't expect me to pay for it, and don't expect me to pretend we're still family. What do you mean? Stella asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew. I mean, you're both cut off. No more credit cards. No more loans. No more financial safety net. Stella, I've canceled our joint accounts, our wedding, our honeymoon, everything. The apartment lease is in my name, so you'll need to find somewhere else to live. Felix, you can't be serious, she said, her voice rising. Half my stuff is in that apartment. My studio space, my client's contact information. I'll have everything packed and sent to you. Just tell me where. She looked around Cyrus's modest studio apartment, probably calculating whether her designer wardrobe would even fit in his tiny closet. And Cyrus, I continued, I'm calling in the loan I gave you for your camera equipment. All $25,000. Payments. Due in 30 days. My brother's face went white. Felix, you know I don't have that kind of money. That equipment is my livelihood? Then you should have thought about that before you decided to destroy our relationship. You can't do this, Stella said, her composure finally cracking. You're being vindictive and cruel. We never wanted to hurt you, but you can't punish us for falling in love. I'm not punishing you for falling in love, I said calmly. I'm removing my financial support from people who betrayed my trust. There's a difference. But where are we supposed to live? How am I supposed to pay for my business expenses? My client meetings. I figure it out, I said. Adults, you made an adult decision to be together. Now handle the adult consequences. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and Stella, I'm sure you'll be interested to know that I've already spoken to several of your clients about the situation. Amazing how quickly word spreads in Portland's design community. Something about professional integrity and personal character being interlinked. Her face went ashen. You didn't? I didn't have to say much. It's just that you wouldn't be available for projects for a while due to personal circumstances. People can draw their own conclusions. You bastard, she whispered. A bastard would have posted those photos from the restaurant on social media. A bastard would have told everyone in our social circle exactly what kind of people you both are. A bastard would have made sure you never worked in this city again. I opened the door and stepped outside. I'm not a bastard. I'm just done being a fool. As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror, standing in the doorway of the studio, probably just beginning to realize that their romantic fairy tale was about to collide. With some very harsh financial realities, my phone started buzzing almost immediately. First Stella, then Cyrus, then Stella again. I turned off the phone and drove home to start the next phase of my life, a life where I would never again confuse financial generosity with love, or mistake loyalty for stupidity. 3 weeks after the breakup, I was drowning in work and loving every minute of it. My real estate development company, Young Properties, had been thriving. But I'd been so focused on wedding planning and relationship drama that I'd been coasting rather than growing. Now, with no distractions, I threw myself into expanding our operations. That's how I met June Bell. She walked into my downtown Portland office on a Thursday morning in November, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a charcoal gray suit that screamed competence. She was there to pitch her architectural firm for our newest development project, a mixed-use complex in the trendy Alphabet District that would combine luxury condos with ground-floor retail space. Mr. Young, she said, extending a firm handshake, thank you for taking this meeting. I know Bell & Associates isn't the biggest firm in the city, but I think you'll find our approach to sustainable urban development aligns perfectly with your vision. I'd been expecting someone older, more established. June looked to be in her early 30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a professional chignon and intelligent green eyes that seemed to take in every detail of my office in a single glance. But when she opened her portfolio and started talking about her designs, I forgot all about age and experience. The key to modern urban living, she said. Spreading blueprints across my conference table isn't just creating beautiful spaces. It's about building communities. Look at this courtyard. Design it encourages interaction between residents, while still providing privacy. And these ground floor spaces aren't just retail, they're neighborhood anchors. Okay, a bookstore, maybe a small gallery, places where people naturally gather. She spoke with passion and knowledge, her hands moving expressively as she described sightlines and foot traffic patterns, natural lighting and energy efficiency. This wasn't just someone trying to win a contract. This was someone who genuinely cared about creating something meaningful. "What made you get into architecture?" I asked after she'd finished her presentation. June smiled, the professional mask slipping just slightly. "My grandmother. She lived in one of those soulless apartment complexes from the 70s. You know, the kind? Beige boxes stacked on top of each other with no character, no community space, no connection to the neighborhood. She used to say that buildings should make people feel more human, not less. And do they? Your buildings?" "I like to think so. I designed spaces where I'd want to live, where I'd want my friends and family to live. Spaces that feel like home instead of just shelter." I hired Bell and Associates on the spot. Over the following weeks, June and I worked closely on the Alphabet District project. She had a way of challenging my assumptions without being confrontational, of pushing for better solutions while staying within budget constraints. She was professional, creative, and refreshingly straightforward, a stark contrast to the drama and manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. "You know," she said one evening, as we reviewed the latest revisions over coffee at a quiet cafe in the Pearl District, "you don't seem like the typical real estate developer." "What do typical real estate developers seem like? Money-focused, short-sighted, willing to cut corners for profit?" She stirred sugar into her coffee, considering her words. "You actually care about the communities you're building in. That's rare. My grandfather always said that if you're going to put your name on something, make sure it's something you'd be proud to show your grandchildren." June looked up from her coffee. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." "He was. He's the one who started Young Properties back in the 50s. Built half the apartment buildings in Southeast Portland, always with an eye toward creating neighborhoods, not just housing." "Is he still involved in the business?" Something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. It wasn't just polite conversation. She seemed genuinely interested. "He passed away 2 years ago," I said. "But his philosophy is still the foundation of everything I do." June nodded thoughtfully. "That's beautiful, carrying on someone's legacy like that." We talked for another hour about architecture, urban planning, the future of Portland's development. But we also talked about other things: books, travel, her rescued dog Max, my attempts to learn Italian cooking. It was the kind of easy, flowing conversation I hadn't had in months, maybe years. When I drove home that night, I realized I hadn't thought about Stella or Cyrus once during the entire evening. Over the next few weeks, our coffee meetings became a regular thing. Sometimes we discussed work, but increasingly we talked about everything else. June was smart, funny, and unpretentious. Volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, took rock climbing classes, and had read more books in the past year than I'd read in the past 5. "What happened to your engagement?" she asked one evening in early December. We were walking along the waterfront after dinner, the city lights reflecting on the Willamette River. I'd been dreading this question, but also somehow looking forward to it. My fiancée decided she was in love with my brother instead of me. June stopped walking. "Oh my God, Felix. I'm so sorry. That's awful." It was at the time now. ... I shrugged. I think it was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. Really? We weren't right for each other. I was just too stubborn or too scared to admit it. June resumed walking, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. "What made you realize that? Talking to you, actually." She glanced at me sideways. "Me. When you talk about your work, your eyes light up. You get animated, passionate, you care about what you're doing in a way that goes beyond just making money or impressing people." I paused, choosing my words carefully. Stella never talked about her work that way. She talked about her clients, her commissions, the recognition she was getting, but never about the actual joy of creating something beautiful. Maybe she just expressed passion differently than I do. Maybe I was so focused on having the perfect-looking relationship that I never bothered to find out if it was actually perfect. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, watching the occasional jogger or dog walker pass by. The December air was cold, but crisp, and the city felt peaceful in a way it rarely did during the day. "Can I ask you something?" June said eventually. "Of course. Are you dating me because I'm the opposite of your ex, fiancé, or because you actually like me?" The question caught me off guard, both for its directness and for the underlying insecurity it revealed. I stopped walking and turned to face her. "June, I need you to understand something. The woman I was engaged to was beautiful, sophisticated, well-connected, everything that looked perfect on paper. But in 3 years together, she never once asked me what I was thinking about when I got quiet, never remembered that I preferred tea to coffee, never seemed interested in my opinions about anything that wasn't directly related to her. I took a step closer to her. In 2 months of working together, you've done all of those things and more. You listen when I talk, you challenge me to be better, you make me laugh. You remember details about my life that I mentioned in passing weeks ago. Felix, I'm dating you because when I'm with you, I feel like the best version of myself, not some performance of who I think I should be, just ... me." June smiled, that genuine, unguarded smile that had become my favorite thing about our meetings. "Good answer? Was it a test?" "Maybe a little," she laughed. "I had to make sure you weren't. Just rebounding with the first woman who paid attention to you." "And your conclusion?" "My conclusion is that your ex-fiancé is an idiot." I kissed her then, standing there on the waterfront with the city lights sparkling around us. It was nothing like kissing Stella. There was no performance, no careful choreography, just genuine connection and warmth. When we broke apart, June was smiling. "So what happens now?" "Now we see where this goes," I said. "No pressure, no timelines, no expectations, beyond enjoying each other's company." I liked the sound of that. As I drove her home that night, I realized that for the first time in years, I was genuinely excited about the future, not because I had it all planned out, but because I didn't. I was learning to appreciate uncertainty, to find joy in discovery rather than control. I had no idea that in just a few weeks, everything would change again, but this time, the surprise would be entirely in my favor. 2 months into dating June, I received a phone call that would change everything. "Mr. Young, this is Margaret Thorne from Thorne Davidson and Associates. I was your grandfather's estate attorney. I need to schedule a meeting with you as soon as possible." I'd assumed all of my grandfather's estate matters had been settled after his death 2 years ago. His will had been straightforward. The majority of his assets went to my father, with smaller bequests to various family members and charities. I'd inherited his vintage watch collection and a modest sum that I'd used to expand Young Properties. "Is there a problem with the estate, Margaret?" "Not a problem exactly, but there's been a development that requires immediate attention." "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" Margaret's law office occupied the entire top floor of a historic building in downtown Portland. All dark wood paneling and leather-bound law books. She was a woman in her 70s with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that made her one of the most respected estate attorneys in the city. "Felix, what I'm about to tell you will come as a surprise. Your grandfather left very specific instructions that this information not be revealed until certain conditions were met." She opened a thick file folder and pulled out a document I'd never seen before. "This is a codicil to your grandfather's will, dated 6 months before his death. In it, he established what's called a conditional bequest, essentially, an inheritance that only activates under specific circumstances." I leaned forward in my chair. "What kind of circumstances? Your marriage?" "Specifically, according to this document, if you marry before your 35th birthday, which is next month, if I'm correct, you inherit the entirety of your grandfather's private investment portfolio." My mouth went dry. "What private investment portfolio, Margaret?" smiled. The one worth approximately $43 million. The room seemed to tilt. 43 million? Your grandfather was a very shrewd investor, Felix. While he lived modestly and ran Young Properties as a small family business, was quietly building a portfolio of real estate investments, tech stocks, and municipal bonds. He wanted to ensure that this wealth would only go to a family member who demonstrated both financial responsibility and personal stability. But why the marriage requirement? He believed that marriage represented a certain level of maturity and commitment. In his words, a man who can maintain a successful marriage has learned to put something bigger than himself first. He felt that this quality was essential for managing significant wealth responsibly. I stared at the document, trying to process what I was hearing. So if I get married before my 35th birthday next month, I inherit $43 million? Correct. But there's another condition. The marriage must be to someone who meets certain character requirements outlined in the codicil. Margaret handed me another page. My grandfather's handwriting covered the margins, his thoughts on what constituted a suitable partner for his heir. The intended spouse must demonstrate financial independence, professional achievement, and what your grandfather termed moral character. They cannot have been involved in any legal troubles, cannot have a history of financial irresponsibility, and cannot be motivated primarily by the prospect of inheriting wealth. I thought immediately of June, her successful architectural firm, her integrity, her complete lack of knowledge about my potential inheritance. Margaret, what happens if I don't get married by my 35th birthday? The money goes to charity? Your grandfather established the Portland Community Development Foundation, which would receive the entire $43 million to fund affordable housing and urban renewal projects. And what happens if I marry someone who doesn't meet these character requirements? The same thing? The money goes to charity? Margaret leaned back in her chair. Felix, I should mention that your grandfather also included provisions for other family members in this codicil. Other family members? Your brother Cyrus? If you fail to meet the marriage requirement, and if Cyrus marries before his 33rd birthday next year, he becomes eligible for the inheritance provided his spouse also meets the character requirements. My blood ran cold. Does Cyrus know about this? Not yet. But according to the terms of the codicil, if you don't inherit the money next month, I'm required to inform him of his potential eligibility. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. Cyrus's 33rd birthday was in 8 months. If he knew about this inheritance, would he marry Stella just to claim the money? And more importantly, would Stella qualify under my grandfather's character requirements? Margaret, let me ask you a hypothetical question. If someone had been engaged to me and then left me for my brother, would that disqualify them under the moral character clause? Margaret's expression remained carefully neutral, but I caught a slight tightening around her eyes. That would certainly raise questions about their character and motivations. The codicil specifically mentions loyalty and faithfulness as important qualities. And if that same person had been financially dependent on me during our relationship, using my credit cards and living expenses without contributing equally, that would suggest financial irresponsibility, yes. I felt a grim satisfaction. Even if Cyrus learned about the inheritance and married Stella, she would likely be disqualified under the character requirements. But I couldn't take that chance. Margaret, I need to ask you not to inform Cyrus about any of this until after my birthday next month. I'm legally required to follow the terms of the codicil, Felix. If you don't inherit by your 35th birthday, I must inform him within 30 days. I understand. But until then, this stays between us. Of course, I left Margaret's office with my head spinning. $43 million. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having, enough to expand Young Properties into a major development company, enough to fund the kind of community-focused projects June and I had been dreaming about. But more than the money, I was struck by my grandfather's wisdom. He'd seen something in the dynamics of our family that I'd been blind to. He'd known that Cyrus was impulsive, that he made decisions based on emotion rather than principle. And somehow he'd created a system that would reward genuine character over opportunism. That evening, I took June to dinner at Le Pigeon, one of Portland's most exclusive restaurants. She looked beautiful in a midnight blue dress, her hair down around her shoulders for once instead of pulled back in her usual professional style. You seem distracted tonight, she said over dessert. Everything okay? I'd been debating all evening whether to tell her about the inheritance. On one hand, I wanted complete honesty in our relationship. On the other hand, I wanted to be absolutely certain that her feelings for me weren't influenced by the prospect of wealth. June, can I ask you something serious? Of course. Do you see a future for us? Long term, I mean. She set down her fork and looked at me carefully. That's a loaded question. I know, but I need to know where your head is. Felix, I care about you a lot. These past 2 months have been wonderful, and I think we could have something really special together. But are you asking because you want to know, or because you're building up to something specific? I reached across the table and took her hand. I'm asking because I love you, and I want to marry you. June's eyes widened. Felix, ... I know it's soon. I know we've only been dating for 2 months. But I also know that what we have is real and rare and worth fighting for. Are you proposing to me? I'm telling you that I want to. But I want to make sure you're ready to hear it. June was quiet for a long moment, her fingers intertwined with mine. This isn't about your ex-fiancé, is it? Some kind of rebound impulse? No. This is about you and me, and the fact that I can't imagine my future without you in it. She smiled then, that radiant, genuine smile that had become my anchor. Then yes, Felix, I'm ready to hear it. The phone call came 3 weeks after my proposal to June. Margaret Thorne's voice was crisp and professional. Felix, I need to schedule an emergency family meeting. Your marriage tomorrow triggers certain provisions in your grandfather's estate that require immediate disclosure to all affected parties. Your parents, your brother, and his wife will need to be present. Can you arrange for everyone to be at my office tomorrow at 2 p.m.? I smiled grimly. I'll make. Sure, they're there. The next morning, June and I had a small ceremony at the courthouse with just her parents as witnesses. She looked radiant in a simple cream-colored dress, completely unaware of the financial windfall that would follow our vows. I'd decided to tell her about the inheritance after the meeting. I wanted our marriage to be about love, not money. At Margaret's office, the atmosphere was tense. My parents sat on one side of the conference table, looking confused about why they'd been summoned. Cyrus and Stella sat on the other side, both fidgeting nervously. Stella kept glancing at my wedding ring, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. Before we begin, Margaret announced, I'd like to congratulate Felix and June on their marriage this morning. Stella's face went white. Marriage? You got married today? Just a few hours ago, I said, taking June's hand. June, meet my family. Family, meet my wife. Margaret opened her file. The reason for today's meeting is to disclose the activation of a conditional bequest in Theodore Young's will, Felix, by marrying before your 35th birthday to someone who meets the character requirements outlined in the codicil. You have inherited your grandfather's private investment portfolio. What investment portfolio? My father asked. The one worth $43 million. The silence in the room was deafening. Stella's mouth fell open. Cyrus looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. 43 million? Stella whispered. Margaret nodded. The inheritance required marriage to someone of proven character and financial independence. Mrs. Young's architectural credentials and reputation make her an ideal candidate. Stella turned to stare at me, her eyes filling with a mixture of rage and desperation. You knew. You knew about this money when you chose my brother over me. I smiled coldly. Actually, I didn't know until after you'd already made your choice. But I have to say, grandfather's timing was perfect. Cyrus finally found his voice. What about me? Don't I get anything? Margaret consulted her documents. You would have been eligible if Felix had failed to meet the requirements and you married before your 33rd birthday. However, given recent circumstances regarding your relationship with your brother's former fiancée, I'm afraid the character clause would likely disqualify your current spouse. Stella shot to her feet. This isn't fair. That money should be. Be what? I interrupted. Should be yours? You gave up any claim to anything of mine when you decided to elope with my brother? That night, June and I were celebrating in my penthouse overlooking the Willamette River. We'd finally told her about the inheritance. She was still processing the magnitude of what had happened. $43 million, she kept repeating. Felix, do you realize what we could do with that money? The community projects we could fund, the affordable housing developments? I loved that her first thought was about how to use the money to help others, not what designer clothes she could buy or what luxury vacations we could take. It confirmed everything I already knew about her character. The doorbell rang at nearly midnight. June and I looked at each other in confusion. Who would be visiting at this hour? Through the security monitor, I saw Stella standing in the hallway. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup streaked with tears, and she was still wearing the same outfit from the lawyer's office. She looked desperate. "Don't answer it," June said. "Quietly, I have to. She'll just keep coming back until I do." I opened the door, but kept the security chain engaged. "What do you want, Stella? Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, Felix. There has to be a way to fix this." "Mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. I'll leave Cyrus. I'll do anything. Anything." I almost laughed. Stella, 6 months ago, anything would have meant having an honest conversation about our relationship. Now, anything means you want access to $43 million. That's not true. I love you, Felix. I've always loved you. Cyrus was just. He was a moment of weakness, a mistake. But you and I, we have history. We have nothing, I interrupted. We never did. I was just too blind to see it. June appeared beside me, her hand gently touching my arm. "Felix, is everything okay?" Stella looked at June with pure hatred. "You don't know him like I do. You don't know that he'll get bored with you, that he'll actually," I said, closing the door slightly so only my face was visible. "She knows me better in 2 months than you did in 3 years. She knows I prefer tea to coffee, that I read mystery novels to relax, that I worry about gentrification displacing longtime Portland residents. She knows me, Stella. Now, you only ever knew my bank account. Felix, please, go home to your husband. Build a life with him that doesn't depend on my money or my sympathy. Learn to stand on your own." I closed the door and turned back to June, who was watching me with admiration. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I said, and for the first time in years, I truly meant it. Some choices can't be undone, and sometimes. That's exactly how it should be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.